All right, good afternoon. I fear they haven't rung the bell downstairs yet to end coffee break. The bell is being rung right now, but we will get started so as not to fall behind time. So thank you all for coming. This session is called The Centrality of Informality. So recognizing the innovation and transformative potential of informal areas for sustainable climate action in cities. It's co-organized by the Cities Alliance and SPARC. We'll have sort of two parts to this session. So the first part will be online presentations that will talk about some living labs that look at shared mobility and informal transport. And then we'll have a second portion, which will be a panel discussion about informality and climate action. So in order to kick things off, I'm going to turn it over for a very short introduction of the session by Sheila Patel from SPARC, who's online, I believe. Sheila, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. And can you hear me?
We can, and I've heard your voice booming several times throughout the room, so I know that you can be well heard from a distance. Okay. Go for it.
Thank you, Julie, and welcome everybody to this very important and often invisible aspect of very critical survival for people who live informally, and that is transport. Most cities around the world have begun to look at ways by which more and more public transport becomes a critical way to transition from cars to public transport to reduce emissions, to reduce pollution, and to green the city. And while the challenges of public transport are being examined, they all represent one very critical flaw. And that flaw is that it doesn't encompass the reality that a very large number, sometimes a majority of people in the city live informally, and they remain outside the planned structures that design and deliver public transport. My name is Sheila Patel. It's in the middle of the night in India, and it shows my dedication to this particular program. I am one of the ambassadors for the Race to Resilience that champions the need to include people living and working informally in cities into all the solutions, all the aspects of transitions that are being explored to address the challenges of climate change. And transport remains something that is often undiscussed, ununderstood, and often a space where very little action is taken to produce inclusion for informality. In this particular case, for us at SPARC and for many of us who are part of Slum Dwellers International, the issue of transport was raised during COVID times by a women's collective that came together on Zoom to discuss the challenges that informal neighborhoods face. And the whole detailed and in-depth exclusionary elements of public transport came up in relationship to how much of people's incomes went into going for informal transport, which was in some way or the other had no subsidization by the state as formal public transport often has, and where infrastructure is very limited and exploitative and unsafe, not only for women and children, but for everybody who lives informally. So we are part of this amazing study of 7 countries, six, 7 countries, where different elements of public transport are being examined with a view to not only produce evidence of what is exactly happening, its impact, but to in detail examine how it impacts not only the people who provide the informal transport, but also households, neighborhoods, and in general, people who live informally in that city, what happens. And I think that all of us, especially those of us who work with communities of the urban poor, have begun to understand this immense value and contribution, and to begin to demand that those who are designing informal, those who are designing public transport do not exclude the needs and aspirations of poor communities. Julie, with that, I give back the floor to you. And I hope that this discussion will help city officials, planning organizations, and grassroots activists an opportunity to get together and play different roles in producing the need, but also ways by which in the transition to a adaptation and resilience producing solution basket, that transport is part of that. So back to you.
Great. Thank you, Sheila. And we appreciate your commitment. I recognize how late it is in India right now. So as I said, part one is going to focus on informality, mobility, and livelihoods, and the shared mobility living labs. So we have 3 presenters online. We have Hein Tun, who's the Senior Transport Associate with WRI. We have Arturo Steinvorth Álvarez, who's with the San Jose Living Lab, and Aneerudha Paul, who's a professor of KRVIA Mumbai and technical consultant to SPARC. So Hein, I'm going to hand it over to you. I think you have the presentation and you're the first speaker.
Thanks, Julie. I hope everybody can see the screen and can hear me well. So I'm Hein Tun. So I'm just going to do a bit of introductions, I guess, about the living labs. So WRI and VRE recently did a research on counting what like the NDC, and then we found that there are not a lot of mentions or discussions around these semi-formal or informal transport in this NDC, which is quite alarming. And then we would like to, I guess, shift the conversations a little bit about that. So what exactly are the semi-formal or informal transport modes? So in the literature, you can see a lot of different terms saying alternative, paratransit, popular, semi-formal. But the first term, all these illegal terms, the illegal is problematic because it's in a lot of the different parts of the world. This is the main mode, if not the only mode of transport for millions. I don't know if it's billions of people doing that. So it's usually they have flexible schedules and services. Instead of having centralized government, you have like owners owning 1 or 2 or maybe more, depending on the countries and cities, and they are operated under more relaxed regulations. That also depends on the context. So this is a quite quick definitions of what we're talking about. This is another example. The spectrums is the tapestries of different modes you can see across and how the different capacity range. And now we go to Africa, and then you can see the names are all everywhere, how they are called in different parts of Africa. And then if you just look at 2- and 3-wheelers, it's rich there in terms of what they're being called. So what is this living lab that we're talking about? So the living lab, it's funded by Volvo Research Foundation. And then we call this thing, this coalition called PRISM, Partnership for Research on Informals and Shared Mobility. So we recognize the informals and shared mobility. It's important mode of transport, but poorly understood. So the way to do it is by understanding our own positionality. So where does the knowledge come from? The knowledge should be coming from the local agency instead of coming from different, I don't know, 5,000 miles away. So that idea, so that's how we, group of us, come together to put this together. It's a action-oriented research that's based on the ground, and then it's going to be iterated engagements. The locations are in 7 different labs in 8 different cities. You can see this kaleidoscopic modes of different transport, and then the issues are different, but they all have common threads. And we're trying to do this by building knowledge on the ground. So that's what this talk is about, and I will hand it to the San Jose lab.
Thank you, Hein. And in our case, we are going to present the San Jose research that we're doing in Costa Rica. As Sheila and Hein were mentioning, these are modes that move a lot of people, especially in contexts where their income levels might be lower, but not necessarily limited to those kind of things. So I'm just going to go over a bit of the context of the community that we're working on, and basically finalizing with some of the initial findings from our research. Next slide, please. Perfect. In San Jose, these services have been around for basically more time than I have been alive, which is something to say, but no one has really documented anything about the popular transport or informal transport services. And that's what our research is based on. We're trying to compile information from different sources, talking to the different stakeholders in the country, but also going beyond that and generating information on the ground, characterizing the different modes of operation that we see in the city, evaluating also the perception that users have about these kind of services, and also listening to the operators to see what they are thinking about with the services, where they're taking them, and how can they integrate or be integrated into the regulated transport services which are provided by the national government. Next slide, please. Pavas is, and we'll see in a map later, the largest district of our capital city, which is San Jose, and it's also the most populated one, with almost 23% of the population of San Jose. And this district has different realities. There's one part that is high income. There's another large part of the district that is lower income and informal settlements, or at least settlements without the satisfaction of basic needs. And it has transport services, which are generally covering the main parts of the district, although, well, spatially covering this the district itself, but not necessarily temporarily covering it, because services don't necessarily operate when people need them the most sometimes. And next slide, please. Well, we have 2 types of services: the minibus and the taxi services, or using automobiles, which in Costa Rica are popularly known as pirates, piratas. And as you see here, the facilities in Pavas that are covered, we can see a lot of the different spots: parks, sports facilities, educational centers, health centers, bus stops and train stops, and other commercial areas, which, if you see all the different lines, those are the regulated transport services as such. But in the end, we're trying to see how the popular or informal transport services are in comparison to these kind of regulated services. Next slide, please. And our methodology, as in other research groups that are part of the PRISM partnership, we're doing a lot of work with institutional, whether it's local authorities, national authorities, or public transport operators, Then we're working also with academia. We've consulted with, for example, municipal services such as police services, just to understand and to confirm what we want to know about the informal or popular transport services in PAS. We're doing desk research. We're also doing lots of field work and also trying to go a little bit beyond the regulated transport services and digitizing certain parts of the information, especially regarding regulated transport services. So those are the main or the core areas in our research, and that's how we're going forward with it. Next slide, please. And based on the different activities that we have carried out so far, we see that these kind of services are people perceive them as insecure, but they learn to live with that risk in the end. They know that they are not necessarily the safest ones, but they need them. And they learn to manage that risk perception. And in the end, they provide them an indispensable service for them to be able to access jobs, to move around the community. And in the end, again, they manage their daily risk, but it's not necessarily something that from the public perspective or from the public policy perspective you want to promote. There's another case which I'm not exactly sure if it's only in the Costa Rican or Central American contexts, but these services, the popular transport services, are related to drug trafficking. And in the end, they are either used to transfer drugs from a point to the other, or they might be financed by organized crime institutions. And in the end, they might charge operators for a fee or a permit to be able to operate within those areas and in a safe way. Another thing is that these services are highly used by vulnerable populations, whether it's migrants, whether it's low-income populations, women, children, to move around their communities. And they are mainly chosen for fast travel, and also another of the main reasons is route flexibility. You can basically take them somewhere, especially the minibuses, and that you can ask them to leave you anywhere, which is not necessarily the case with public transportation or the regulated public transport services. And we're also asking them, what can we do or what could public policy do to improve these experiences? And as you see, there are different opinions. Some people even say that they're good as they are, and they really serve the community well, and it's important for them to have these kind of services. But of course, you would want to have them with a little bit more of customer-focused approaches, especially regarding the safety and the security purposes that were mentioned earlier in the research. And if I'm not mistaken, that would be everything that we have covered so far in this during our research, and I'll pass it to Aneerudha.
Thank you, Arturo. A very early good morning from Mumbai. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so I'll immediately come to the informal shared mobility in the context of Mumbai. So what we show you is the Mumbai metropolitan region, and what you show is nearly the pink area, which is 14.2 million. That's the Mumbai city and the surrounding city of Navi Mumbai and Thana. So that's actually the place where a complete system of auto rickshaws are organized, but it is a contract system of auto rickshaw organized. And you can see the yellow region now, which is in the periphery. That's completely the Mumbai metropolitan region, as we know, is 26 million. So 12 million people use what is called informal shared mobility systems. Okay, so 12 million people are dependent in this metropolitan region on systems which are informally organized. As you can see in the image, actually you can see these auto rickshaws and people waiting for these auto rickshaws. Okay, they provide last mile connectivity to the people. Occasionally, there are some buses which are organized by the municipal corporation, but they are actually the schedules are such that they cannot in any way, as you can see, take the load of the requirements which are huge, the demands which are huge. And as you can see also in the image, not only do you see that there are transport activities going on, just along with it are other allied activities, like there are vendors who are very, very important, who are integral to this whole system, who actually are there because people, while using this last mile connectivity system, would obviously shop, would spend some time recreating. So this is a completely important ecosystem that gets formed. And this is completely, as we said, informally organized. Both the vending, the drivers, as well as associated activities like cleaning, like mechanics. This whole system has been informally organized in the peripheries of Mumbai. And as you can see, I'll just tell you with a context where we are studying. We are doing a very detailed study. As you can see, there is a red block there. It's called Nala Sopara. So Nala Sopara is a suburban station in the Western Railway line. And that's where we are studying the system, because all these are based on the railway system. After the railway station, on the east and west, there are outlets. From one of these outlets, a complete system is organized. So we come to the next slide. Okay, so that's the green is the Nala Sopara station area on the eastern side. So we are studying one such system. We know that these systems, as the railway stations are there in this area, you can see 4 railway stations. These systems get organized on the eastern and the western side of each of these stations. So once we study one and understand one, our idea was we can replicate them in the other stations too. So just going to a detailed map of showing you how this is organized. You can see the station area. From there, people come out, and both the north and the south, you can see they are very well served with these routes that you can see. And as we go to the eastern side, we travel to the eastern side, it is actually connecting to another very, very important transport infrastructure, that is the national highway. Okay. And as we connect to that, we actually cross a complete landscape of industries. And there you can see there's only one yellow line. And that's where a lot of the vulnerable population stays. And it's not very well served. It's only one line that is served. Okay, the rickshaws don't go inside the settlements. There are a lot of informal settlements there. They don't go in there. So let me just tell you the context of these. In this case, and in the case of Mumbai, there are 450,000 auto rickshaws. That's the amount of auto rickshaws they have. Okay. In fact, we were doing a calculation. We understood that 10% of the population of Mumbai is dependent in terms of livelihood on informal shared mobility. And most of them stay in informal settlements. In fact, when we were doing this study, we realized also that after construction workers, they are the largest, the informal transport workers, of which 60% own these autos. Like 40% actually they have owners from whom they rent, but 60% are owned by the people who drive these autos. So that's the ecosystem that we are looking at. Okay. So just the next slide. So this shows the context. As you can see, the north-south middle-class neighborhood near the station, very well served, because that's where the profitable routes are. And as you go towards the east, the yellow areas are basically industrial areas, which are served by these neighborhoods of immigrant workers, okay, who actually come to the station, who go to the Mumbai city for work. Another detailed drawing of the complete ecosystem, the railway station. The next slide, it's an animation. It shows the various points from where a complete ecosystem is formed. Okay. And what happens is there are people walking from these points to these places where they can take their rickshaws. There are nearly 6 points near the station from where they take the rickshaws, 6 different points. And while traveling, as you can see in the images, there are many vendors there who actually conduct their livelihoods, and they are all integrally linked. The complete system is integrally linked, and that's how this system works. So, and as we understand, this complete system is a case where you can see equity getting played out. This complete system is such that people from all walks of life in this neighborhood participate. And so with this, what I'll do is, what do we want to do? I'll just come to the end. What do we want to do with this? We want to work towards advocacy. We want to explain to the government to first give them recognition as a public transport system. We want to also work very closely with both the drivers as well as these inhabitants of low-income neighborhood, first to provide them mobility and improve the livelihood of drivers. And finally, we want to make this whole system green and sustainable. So that's our primary effort towards this project. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to invite my panelists to start taking the stage. Thank you all for your presentations. There were 3 things that I really liked that I'm just going to, not the most consequential, but I'll just say I love the map of Africa and all the different ways the minibuses are called. It shows like such diversity of this. My favorite thing with the San Jose had to be the idea of a trusted pirate. It seems like a bit of an oxymoron, but I love that they talked about the reliability and the trust of the pirate mobility. And then the scale of Mumbai just is incredible. I mean, I looked it up very quickly. If Mumbai was its own country, it'd be the 57th largest country in the world, which means there are over 100 countries that have less population than Mumbai has. And it's just hard to think about, I think, the scale of that challenge. Anyway, do we still have Sheila online? Question to... Excellent. If we can put her on the screen. So now we're going to shift to a quick panel discussion about informality with Sheila joining us online, hopefully. And we have Greg Munro, who's the director of Cities Alliance, and we have Debra Roberts, who has many titles, and I don't know, I'd let you choose one, but you know, I think, what did I put in my notes? University of KwaZulu-Natal and University of Twente, but we know you have many other titles. So I'm gonna slide over here as the moderator, my other role. Okay, great. Sheila, can you hear us?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so my first question is kind of looking backwards, okay? So we just had a great example, I think, about informal mobility and informal transport, but of course we know informality takes many different forms in cities. And it's really a trend that's shaped cities for decades now. So if we look sort of to the past and think about how this has shaped cities, what are some of the innovations, limitations, what have we learned, and what do we need to sort of take from this past of how informality has shaped cities into our future of how we kind of address climate change in these contexts? Debra, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, great. So I get the $64 million question. I think that there are a number of lessons that we can learn from the past, in the sense that I think that the level of innovation, and I mean, South Africa also has a vast informal network of transport, which secured the mobility of people during the apartheid era when the government wasn't providing transport. And I think it really anchors a key message that informality brings to the table, which is people are voting with their feet. They're saying that the city, in whatever form we are presenting it to them, is simply not working. It's not allowing access, it's not allowing mobility, it's not providing jobs, it's not providing shelter. And I think it really indicates the agency of people against tremendous odds. people will literally pick up, they will build cities within cities in informal settlements. They will create informal economies, which become really powerful in the context of urban economies. They will create whole transport systems that are resilient. I know in South Africa, once we moved to democracy, the sense was we would approach the transport system, we would begin to formalize it. And that simply has been very difficult to do because of the flexibility provided by informal transport networks. So even when we've engaged, and I know this from the work we've done in the city of Durban with bus rapid transit systems, the taxi system is still the preferred choice because it does get you to that last mile to your house, greater flexibility, it's more cost effective. Of course, it comes with all sorts of challenges. And so I think it also points to the difficulties of when formal meets informal and the need to manage that interface in a consultative and constructive way. So I think it points to agency, it points to a new way of doing things, it points to resilience, and I think it points to the need to manage the interface between formal and informal in a very sensitive and consultative way.
Great, thanks, Deborah. Sheila, over to you. Same question. Looking to the past and this urbanization trends and informality as a systems, what has that taught us and about the limitations but also the innovations taking us forward?
Well, just taking off from where Deborah began, the reality is that for centuries, people who are poor and disenfranchised in different forms have serviced the formal economic engine, of trade, of commerce, and of assistance to all the people who use cities historically as a center of trade. And very often, if you see in Mumbai, the trains which form the main form of transport was not designed for people, it was designed for bringing commodities to the port. And subsequently, it became something that was used more and more for the north-south transportation along the main arteries of how the city developed. And interestingly, the metropolitan region has emerged out of people moving out of Mumbai to the north as the city began to get more and more difficult for poor people to live in. And therefore, they continue to be invisible and in many ways, a majority that remains unserviced. And therefore, these services spring up in response to what people require. And as we began to become part of the global network which looks at transport, we began to connect it with the demands that women had about transport. And this is women from almost 15 to 17 countries in Asia and Africa, who said that transport never operates in a safe and financially viable space, and it often takes 30 to 40% of people's incomes if they choose to go to work. But one of the things that this particular study does, which I'm very excited about because it's educational for all of us who champion the issues of informality, is that you have to deal not only with the population that it serves, but also the people who run these processes and whose lives and livelihoods depend on it. And they are also surviving in informality, and they are constantly coping with very aggressive pushbacks from formal institutions. It's almost like there's a battle going on for the right to survive in that domain of transport. And therefore, if these are not looked at, then the service delivery that is needed to make the system function also get ignored. So if you just see the volume that Aneerudha talked about of the number of rickshaws, the It means that there needs to be an infrastructure of repair, of providing them with fuel, of the whole thing of trade, new rickshaws, second-hand rickshaws, rented rickshaws. All these, there's a whole amazing the issue that has to be addressed. And he hasn't spoken about, and they haven't spoken about these intersections where formal and informal meets, which is the train stations. That's where the connectivity happens between the formal and the informal, and the whole economy of all the informal stalls that are there. I mean, right now it's like a jungle, and there are lots of challenges. It is unsafe. It is unregulated. But the reality is that regulation in the way it's being produced right now is also not going to work, because it's not sensitive to the issues that challenge the people who operate in informality. Plus, we are seeing that there's a huge opportunity here of electrification of all these rickshaws that can transform the pollution, the costs, and the whole carbon emissions that are at the moment also destroying informal neighborhoods with all these things zipping up and down. So I believe that all of us, first of all, need to develop a methodology to study, aggregate, and bring out the reality of how large volumes these informal transport systems provide, and to also differentiate the aggregation of how it impacts women, children, people with disabilities, people who have to go very long distances in order to earn incomes. And I think all these things are not being discussed in the large mitigation projects that are popularly brought in at cities in the form of public transport. So it would be interesting to examine if we could develop a simple but powerful way of documenting in every single city the role, contribution, and challenges of informality and transport, and then look at what we need to do to produce a more just and equitable transport system, because cities cannot function without transport. So back to you, Julie.
Thanks, Sheila. All right, Greg, last one on looking to the past before we switch over to looking to the future.
Yeah, so looking to the past, I think in large parts of the world, we've learned nothing. So, I mean, if you look at rapid growth and unplanned growth and the urban sprawl that we see in so many of our cities, because there's been no urban expansion planning. And if you look at demographic trends, particularly in Africa, there are 10 countries in Africa that are going to quadruple in their population in the next few decades. Now, when you start, we all gasped at the picture of Mumbai and the greater metropolitan area being what, 38 million? When you start talking about a potential 40 to 45 million people in the city of Kinshasa, and there was no urban expansion planning, I would get very scared when I think of that. I'm going to borrow something that one of my fellow panelists said, and that is that in industrialization, it happened on the back of industrialization, I think is what you said, Deborah, that urbanization happened on the back of industrialization in Europe, and this isn't happening in Africa. So unless we have greater planning and greater urban expansion planning, thinking about the growth of our cities and the growth of informality, I think we are in trouble if we don't do that. The second, I'm going to borrow something that Sheila said, I think it was yesterday, and that is informality is not an add-on. It's not that there's one ecosystem that this is a city, and there's another ecosystem over there, which is the add-on, which is informality. And I think we saw it during COVID, where the informal sector, the economy closed down overnight. And the effect it had on the formal economy was quite profound, because you realize some of the supply chains that actually went between these two economies. It's one economy. In the same way, it's one city. So informality is not an add-on. We need to look at an inclusive, integrated city, not only for the future in our planning, but also for now. And then within the context of climate, slum upgrading is not something that's separate to climate. Slum upgrading is a climate response. You create more resilient communities, you create more resilient infrastructure, you have basic services that are better drainage, which means you don't get the flooding that would, or the effects won't be as bad as what they would have been without. So if you have a climate response, having a climate response or having an upgrading within informal settlements is itself a climate response. Of course, the big thing in informality and a climate response is finance. And I always say this route of getting money from mitigation to adaptation, from the global north to the global south, from national government to city government, and from city governments to informality is a long route. It's a long and arduous route. And we have to keep on working at it, because with the growth of informality, it's going to be a major problem for us and for our communities going forward.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, so you started to touch on some, of these issues around integrated and inclusive. We also hear a lot about the need for transformative climate action, right? Sort of looking towards the future. So, I mean, the question is essentially, how can we start to think about what transformative climate action means and looks like in informal areas, and what that means to really reconceptualize what informality is and our sort of narrative around that, to make sure that we bring together this need for transformative climate action with what is the reality on the ground in so many of these cities. So Sheila, you've got your camera off, but I know you've thought a lot about the need to change our narrative on informality and what that could look like.
So my new slogan is that the new normal is informality, and that informality is not the opposite of formality, but it is where innovation, options, possible solutions emerge. And when they work for, unfortunately, when they work for the elite, they become formal. But when they work for the poor, they remain informal. And so one of the real challenges we have is to not look at this as different, as invisible, as something that you hope will somehow disappear. But the beginnings of acknowledging the urbanization of the planet and our responsibility to ensure that everybody has a minimum quality of life, as well as our choices of how we live, we work, we engage our neighborhood, reduces the burden that we are now faced with in terms of the planetary emergency that we are facing. So you're not going to be able to deal with the 1.5 challenge by ignoring this reality and saying, we look at it in the future, because it has to be now that we combine new innovative solutions that are universal, that fulfill both the obligation of equity and survival, and use the immense potential of all the amazing changes that and innovations and research that's producing amazing insights to produce something that we can do universally. But I think the real problem is that, and I think Innovate for Cities has a huge obligation to demand ways by which the power of science and our commitment to justice demand solutions that are universal. And I think that in our particular case, these 7 country studies, each coming with their own insights on the basis of the reality in which each of us work, have begun to show us exponentially, multipliable opportunities. But we are all stuck in, first of all, defending the right of survival of informality. And unless the politics of cities and the politics of nations acknowledges that this is going to grow, rather like Greg said, it's going to grow, it's not going to vanish. And that we have to look at ways by which we use research, technology, and our own aspirations to produce solutions that are universal and no longer divide our cities into formal. I mean, it's another form of apartheid, isn't it? That you allow some things to be accessible to some and then not the other. And then by the time you recognize the other, the cost of providing something universally has gone up 10 times. I mean, this is what has happened in water and sanitation. In Mumbai, in 1952, when the city's water supply was designed, every settlement in the city at that point on the map looked like no development zone. And so nothing was laid out there. And if you have to do it now, it is 100 times more in cost, in real costs. And the same thing is happening with transport. So I feel that this is an amazing place to produce such recommendations and to bring green technology much earlier into the picture. Green fuel, improving pollution systems, becoming sensitive to the needs of children. One of the things that Aneerudha didn't say in our case was that these rickshaws can't even go inside the neighborhood because those pathways are too small. They are not paved. And in the monsoon, they become like muddy pools of water. So, I mean, the micro reality in each and every one of these situations makes things very, very vulnerable. So I think creating some very broad policy commitments to action and to hold cities and our municipalities to collectively demand, because most of the transport investments come from the state and they often and always exclude informality. So what kind of policy demands and practical financing demands can we put that force these things to happen? Because in so many countries, transport, public transport in the form of trains and buses often is not provided to where it's needed in the informal places, but it just increases the volume in formal areas where it is underutilized. So back to you, Julie.
Thanks, Sheila. All right, Deborah, I know you've thought a lot about this from both a practitioner and a researcher's perspective. I think we even had a session in Edmonton 6 years ago that was about transformative climate action and informality. So I don't know, what's changed? What do you think now? I mean, what's the wisdom we have in terms of rethinking this narrative and what we could do?
I was in fact just recalling that session back in Edmonton, thinking we're here again, having the same conversation. I think certainly since Edmonton, the science has moved on quite dramatically. We saw the release at the end of that year of the special report on 1.5 degrees of Celsius, which led to a whole new debate linked to the Paris Agreement, achieving net zero by 2050. We've subsequently seen work by the Earth Commission, Johan Rockström and the team, telling us that 6 of the key 9 planetary boundaries have already been exceeded. And I think for me, that points to the fact that if we're talking about transformative approaches to informality, we've got to think about what the consequences of these changes are. And it strikes me in virtually every meeting I go to around the world that this is not a central point of discussion, because this is simply going to change the world that we live in. Certainly in terms of the assessment we did in Working Group 2 of the IPCC in the last assessment cycle, the literature pointed to the fact that we would experience irreversible changes in the natural world, particularly at-risk ecosystems, things like coastal wetlands, the warm water corals, polar mountain ecosystems, rainforests. So there was already indication that we're not going to be able to protect key ecosystems, which we know are key to sustainability. And that will get worse depending on the level of overshoot. And that has consequences for flooding in cities, risk management, the use of ecosystem-based adaptation, and so on. And we're not thinking of the consequences of that. And we also failed to realize that if we return to 1.5, although there are many who believe that we won't, we won't regain those ecosystems. It's not like they're going to pop back up. They're gone. We didn't have literature for the social tipping points. And my experience as a practitioner tells me that the social tipping points are probably closer than the environmental tipping points. And if we talk about informality, I think there's one huge tipping point that no one is talking about. And Sheila, I think, correctly highlighted the intersectionality of these issues. So if we look into the future world of 1.5 overshoot, coming together with a world where we've got 3 billion people, about a third of the world's population living in informal settlements, we simply don't have the toolbox to deal with that. It's a scale of problem, environmentally and socially, that we haven't wrapped our heads around. And will have consequences not only for people living in informal settlements, for urban development, the provision of infrastructure, but will begin to impact on geopolitical stability, just simply because of the scale of the problem. And that, for me, is the kind of debate around the future that we need to be having. We need to be brave and look at this changed future, use the experience that people like Sheila and others have from their experience on the ground, tie that together with the science, try and figure out what that world looks like and how you might begin to respond to it, because it will be a deeply suboptimal future. Quite frankly, I've got cynical. This idea of win-win solutions, I think, is some notion that went out with the Earth Summit in 1992. I think our scientific assessment in Working Group 2 pointed out that we're staring at a future of win-lose scenarios, and the question, who loses and how do they lose? What safety nets do we put in place? And this is a very different conversation. It's not a comfortable conversation, but we don't seem to be brave enough to have it. So for me, that's the future I think we have to grapple with. It's one about being pragmatic and realistic, looking at where we're going and where we're likely to end up, and trying to get our heads around the scale of the problem, because it changes the notion of what we think about as a city, as Greg indicated. In fact, our cities will transform. And my travels show me that while informality may be characterized as a global South challenge, in fact, it's beginning to appear in the cities of the global North. So I think Sheila's new mantra of informality is the new normal is probably not far from the scientific truth.
Thank you. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. So I have my last question, Greg, which is, as Debra just said, we need to be brave, we need to be pragmatic. We know finance is an issue, but we also know we're moving towards a world with increased urbanization, increased climate change, and all the degradation and risks that come with that. But we know that finance is limited. So let's say you're in a medium-sized growing city in Africa and you have $10 million that you can spend. What is the most effective way you think you can spend that to address climate change in informal areas?
So at the Glasgow COP, I facilitated a session on informality and climate. And I had, as one of my panelists, a woman from represented Slum Dwellers International. And when I said she had 5 minutes to talk, she said she would talk until she was finished. And she was right. And she said, this thing that you've caused in the global North that we didn't cause, this thing that you caused that we now suffer from, don't come and tell me what I must now do and make that I'm now the victim, that you must make me part of the solution. Because I might have some ideas that you don't have. And since then, I mean, I've been amazed at some of the things I've seen. I mean, to see the youth in George Township, informal settlement outside or in Lusaka, these 17 and 18-year-olds who have, with their informal settlements, get flooded every year. And their first 3 priorities in their life are climate change, climate change, and climate change. When you see the communities in the Kinawataka wetland in Uganda mobilizing and looking after the wetlands so that they don't get flooded that often, when you see people in the Caribbean, communities in the Caribbean, reshaping their roofs so they don't get blown off in hurricanes. When you see circular economy being done by slum dweller affiliates in Navasha, the circular economy where they're doing their own composting, it has got so sophisticated that they can measure the nutritional value of their soil. I mean, I could go on and on. These are all community-based solutions from and within communities that we often don't know about. So if I had $10 million, I would make sure that the communities in my town and the decision makers in my town were aware of some of these community initiatives. Because if we don't mobilize the communities, and if we don't mobilize and include the poorest sectors of our urban populations in these solutions, we're going to fail. So that would, because with 10 million, I can't do anything else. But I think if we could actually just show, and when we were in Navasha and looked at some of these things, I mean, I had a director general from South Africa saying, I need to bring the South African cabinet here. And I thought, that's a damn good idea. And actually see what communities and the poor, who live in very poor communities, what they're actually doing and how they're responding and adapting to climate responses.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, Sheila, same question to you. In 1 minute, summarize. Okay, probably not in Mumbai. You're not going to get far with the $10 million. So maybe pick a smaller city in India. What would be the first thing you would do?
So first of all, this millions of dollars question and how it will be used first requires a complete different architecture of who makes choices to do what with what knowledge. Throwing money at problems doesn't solve them. You need to develop a tradition of collaborative exploration and learning to make, poor people make something out of nothing. And we know that throwing money, even development money, at problems doesn't produce any real sustainable solutions. So I'm just delighted that Greg has brought this issue up because, if things work, money comes. But if you break that, if you don't create the cycle of trust, innovation, exploration, exploring and expanding solutions, you're not even at a starting point of the race. So creating the city as a whole rather than one which lives in the shadow of the others, which is what is happening right now, is the first step in this process. You treat everybody who lives in the city as part of that macro system of that place and not go neighborhood by neighborhood. But we don't have mechanisms. The only time when the whole city or the whole country gets together is when there's an election. And that's the only time. Otherwise, nobody bothers with informality. Nobody talks about it. Nobody refers to them. And they're isolated and they're left to themselves. And everybody's petrified of more people coming without acknowledging that 3 centuries have gone saying, oh, there are too many people in the city, there are too many people in the city, and the cities keep growing because we have a global economic order that produces urbanization. It's not reversing. So you have to deal with the challenges of what they call the planetary boundaries that Debra referred to, with new innovative relationships of trust and collaboration. If there's no trust and collaboration, forget 10 million, you even put 100 million over there, it'll just be washed away. Because good ideas require courage, trust, and collaboration. And we don't have that in cities. And we certainly don't have leadership that has the courage to be inclusive. And this is my challenge to all the mayors and to state governments or whatever we would call subnational institutions, to acknowledge that there is no reversal. Even today, people are talking, how can we make informality go back to rural areas? Or how can we stop people from agriculture institutional arrangements that are failing to come into the city. So I think that reality check and moving ahead from there is the first step before you start throwing money at it.
Thank you, Sheila. All right. Our next panel's coming on board here. I'm going to give Debra the final word just to say either how she wants to spend her USD 10 million or whatever else she wants to close off with.
Well, perhaps if money was thrown at me, I certainly would take it. But I would put it in the hands of women in informal settlements to support the savings clubs, because I think those are going to be key in developing the kind of early warning systems at an informal level that are going to be necessary in the suboptimal future that I've outlined. And I think those could do with support. So yeah, and I think that's probably an aspect we haven't touched on enough during the course of the last 1.5 days. The gender aspect hasn't been here, and I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of women to use limited resources to make big changes, particularly in the early warning space. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much to my panel. Thanks to the audience. Thanks to everyone online. Sheila, you can go to bed now, and the rest of us can enjoy the next panel. Thanks so much.